Hey, it's Andrea. Today, our phaser math doesn't add up. We get a gruesome Soviet history lesson, and we ask the question, how big does an asteroid have to be to have its own gravitational pull? Hang out with us.
Welcome to the TNG Podcast, the number one place in the Alpha Quadrant to geek out about all things Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm your co-host, Shereese.
I'm your co-host, Andrea. Today we're talking Season 3, Episode 11, The Hunted, written by Robin Bernheim and directed by Cliff Bull. It is stardate 43489.2. While the Enterprise is reviewing a seemingly idyllic planet's application for Federation membership, an escaped prisoner leads her crew to discover an ugly secret: the government's shameful treatment of its war veterans. Bum, bum, bum.
So my first thought was, not another candidate for membership. Because the last time we had a candidate for membership, I'm pretty sure it was the Antikins and the Cele in season 1.
Right.
And that did not go well. So I was like, oh, this does not bode well. Just the fact that we have applicants, like, you guys probably aren't going to get in. Just being honest, you're probably not going to get in.
Yeah, it's not going to go well, and it's going to end with blood, as this one probably did. This episode was actually written as an allegory to the treatment of U.S. veterans of the Vietnam War. Trying to integrate very back into American
thinly
society.
Veiled allegory.
Yes, very thinly veiled. But I did think that it was really interesting to watch this and see so many parallels with the way that the U.S. in general kind of treats their veterans. I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. And the surprise is they're treated really shitty. So that's the surprise ending. But do you have any initial thoughts on this before we really jump in?
This episode was really cool. You and I were talking a little bit about it off mic. And I was saying this guy, the escaped prisoner, is like Jason Bourne in space. Yes. And I'm like obsessed with Jason Bourne. And so put him in space. Yes, please. So I was like, I really enjoyed this episode so much. I did not know what was going to happen from scene to scene to scene, like how he was going to figure things out. And it was wonderful. Yeah. What about you?
I agree. I actually just wrote, what a fun watch, because it was suspenseful and fun, but in a really great, like, action-y, like you said, Jason Bourne, like, popcorny way. I'm just sort of picturing what the writer's room must have looked like as they were putting together the script for this, and how they had to think like 5 steps ahead to think 3 steps back so that they could write it. Like that must have just been so cool. This whole episode felt like one big cat and mouse, and I loved it. I do have 2 teeny little pieces of trivia. One that you might be surprised by. The actor who starred as Roga Danar, his name is Jeff McCarthy. He made a second Star Trek appearance playing the original Doctor in Voyager who dies in the pilot episode.
Oh, no way. Okay, yeah, no, I did not know that, because that guy dies like very, very quickly. So yeah. I'll have to go back and rewatch it.
Yes. Okay. So once I knew that, and I was like, well, Shereese is like the super Voyager fan. I was like, let me go watch like the pilot episode. And you only see a teeny little bit of his face because he's lying like face down. So I was like, okay, it's so easy to like not know. It kind of felt like the Utah episode where it's like, here's a piece of an eyeball, extrapolate the whole head.
Yes.
Yeah. So how would we have known? And then the prime minister of this episode, he is played by an actor named James Cromwell, who's made a bunch of Star Trek appearances. So if you feel like you've seen him before, you have. Although he is best known as playing Zefram Cochrane in First Contact. Which,
oh my gosh, he totally did play Zefram Cochrane. Every time I see him in any movie, show, TV series, what have you, all I can think of is Babe. That's all I can think of, because he was the farmer in Babe.
You're right.
So like,
crap.
Yeah. So every word he was saying,
I did not even remember that.
I just kept hearing, "I'll do, pig. I'll do." Like, that's all I heard. So every time I see him in anything, it's Babe. And that's right. He was Zefram Cochrane, which is like a big deal.
Yes.
In the Trek universe.
Yes. Okay. Never would I have thought of Babe, because I only saw Babe once, like when it first came out and I was a kid. Never, ever would have thought of that. But he just has one of those faces and voices where you're like, I know him from somewhere and I trust him.
Yes. You know him from everywhere. And he always plays a super trustworthy character.
Like very prime minister-y. All right, so that's my trivia. Let's just jump right in. The Enterprise arrives at Angosia 3, and this planet has expressed a desire to join the Federation.
And this planet looks so cool.
Oh my God,
so
the
cool.
city, the city
looks
and everything.
So cool. Yes.
This might be the first in TNG where we see like those really kick-ass cityscapes. Like those become pretty standard around season 4, 5, and onward. Like when you see the Klingon homeworld, it's like a huge sprawling city. But we've only seen like in Ensigns of Command where like Data had to evacuate all those people. We just see like a little town square, but you don't see like a CGI rendering of like what a whole city would look like.
I think we did see it when Wesley went to like his academy tryouts, but that was like a star base on a planet. So similar, but different. Also very cool. And anytime they want to do it, I am all about it. I just love the look of it. And then getting into the city and seeing like how kind of prim and proper everybody was. And, you know, you could see Picard and Riker were pretty impressed, but I was like, I don't know. Applications don't really, I don't have high hopes for you guys. I'm sorry.
Okay, did the like cleanliness and prim and properliness, if that's even a word, which it is not, did it remind you at all of like the Mariposan Society? Because that was too perfect.
You know what? It didn't, but now that you mention it, it absolutely does. And I remember Riker said like, they're a little too stiff for me, right? They were just too polished. Like it seemed like they just didn't have any fun. They're like the opposites of the, in the Utah episode, those like, forget the name of those aliens that were
Brule and the gatherers, that's it.
Yes, the gatherers that were just like so rough and tumble. And sure, they were pirates, but also they seemed fun. Like you could have a good time with them. But these people, they're like very prim and proper, but also seem super boring, like the Mariposans.
Yeah, super boring. Yeah, what they really need is an infusion of Irish people to come and kick shit around.
Or something.
Pick up hay and put down hay. And like, yeah. Okay, so here's the thing though. This episode doesn't really kick off until like 30 seconds into the episode where they're like, uh-oh, there's a problem. Bum, 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 bum. A prisoner has broken out from the penal colony, which I still can never hear without being like, penal colony. But so Shereese is shaking her head because she's
I really am. I'm like,
up.
we are super grown, Andrea. Like, we can't even pretend to be near teenagers. We're like super grown. But in any case, that's what happened.
Penal colony sounds sort of funny to me. Okay, anyway, so a prisoner has broken out from this penal colony and it's called Lunar 5. It's on this moon, which makes sense. And the Enterprise offers to help locate the prisoner. And they do, like, Data's at the helm because, you know, Riker and Picard are down checking out this planet. And Data locates the ship, but this little ship, like, very quickly eludes them. And this was
it flies behind an asteroid.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, like it's going behind an asteroid. We'll just pick it up on the other side. And then it like never comes back out. And they're like, wait, what? And they go around the asteroid and the ship's gone. And you're like, no, there's no way. It has no warp drive. We would have seen it hightailing out of here. We've got this highly powerful ship. How did this little ship escape us? And it was so great because Picard was just like, don't worry, the Enterprise will find it. Go ahead. Number one, go ahead and get that ship. Go ahead and, tractor beam it and pull it back down here. Oh, yes, right away, sir. And Data's like, this will be no problem. And then they're like, sir, we lost it. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, Picard immediately is like, it eluded the Enterprise? It's like, now we know we're dealing with someone who
we underestimated about 10 seconds ago.
Yeah, exactly. But here's something I thought was kind of cool. Riker does consider that maybe the prisoner, who we know because the Prime Minister told us a few minutes ago, his name is Roga Danar, might be hiding in the gravitational pull of the asteroid, thus cloaking it from the ship's sensors. And I went, number one, this is a cool little callback to the Riker maneuver from Peak Performance, where he like went and hid, in the planet's gravitational field. But I thought, that asteroid does not look very big. It's big enough to have a gravitational pull. Like, that just seemed really weird to me, which of course made me wonder, like, how big does an asteroid have to be? Although I didn't care enough to really look it up, but I was like, it's like half the size of the Enterprise. I don't think you get a gravitational pull, but whatever. I mean, Data looks it up and there he was. And then all of a sudden, like, the little drive section is missing and then there's no light side. Like, there's just a whole lot of like, what is going on here?
Yeah, so let's peel that apart a little bit because this is actually a very clever scene and cleverly shot scene as well, where Riker's like, oh my gosh, they're the ship, it is there. It was exactly doing what I thought it was going to do. So they're like, all right, let's snatch it. So I think they try to tractor it or something, and the drive section escapes, and they're like, oh, like he must be hiding in the drive section. So they go to try to analyze that. And then turns out he's actually in some other smaller piece that's been broken off of the ship. So he keeps doing this like really elaborate escape attempts. And the only reason that he was caught is because Data anticipated what he would do based on what he did before. And it calculated the probability of him trying that again, whereas any human would have fallen for the bait. And pretty much like, you know, Data to the rescue. Without Data, like they wouldn't have never found him. And I don't know how he would have escaped, where he was planning to go, how far he could have possibly gotten without the whole rest of his ship. And then the thing about Danar is that he doesn't have any life signs.
Yes, which is so cool.
Yeah, which we find out later he's been altered, so he doesn't have life signs. But at the time, we don't know that. And we're just like, wait, so where is he? He's nowhere. There's no one there. Like that. I mean, all of this, you're just like, we are dealing with a very clever person. And Prime Minister Nyrok is just like, you know, he's very, very, very dangerous. He's extremely dangerous, and he's armed, and like you can't take your eye off of him for a second. And so you're like, crap, he's smart and dangerous. This is not a good combination.
Yes, this is a great combination, unless you're going after the guy, in which case it's a very bad combination. Yes, and I do love that they finally end up kind of pinning him down, and the crew is like, look, anything that is roughly humanoid size or shape, like beam it aboard. And so they beam Danar aboard, and he quickly proceeds to beat the shit out of the security guards. And I love that O'Brien is behind the panel going, more security, more security. And you see him kind of like ducking lower and lower by the panel. And then, you know, good old O'Brien, he does like jump in, and he gets beaten the hell out of like immediately.
I think he had the right idea in the first place, just to hide and call for backup.
Hide behind your transporter panel, which would take Danar 0.01 second to get around. But
I hope he didn't see you and didn't hear you saying, security, we need a little bit more help. Yes. And then we go into the most epic hallway battle ever.
Thank you.
Oh my word. This is such a good battle. And I love how Worf like protects Riker and like, I mean, it's just like this whole time you're kind of like, oh my gosh, what have we stumbled into? And at the same time, you a little bit want Danar to win because he's just so cool.
Yes, he is so cool. You just want to see, you just don't want the match to be over this early, because you're like, I want to see what else he could do.
Because we're currently at like minute 4 of the episode. Something.
Yes. And it's been 2 minutes of like this fucking Starfleet tour and 2 minutes of Danar beating the shit out of everybody. And it's been awesome. And Worf does peek out from like behind the turbo lift, which I thought was kind of cool to see, like Worf being like really cautious for the first time ever. And then he like charges down the hallway on top of Danar. And then like multiple other security guards finally come around because they've been kind of revived, and they pile on. And then I don't know if you noticed this, but Riker totally had a little FOMO because he like showed up after all this, and like it was like the 15th person on the dog pile, where you're like, why even get on the dog pile at this point? Like there's so many people, and he kind of just like ended up leaning on the guy. And I think the director must have been like, that's not gonna work for the shot. Like we'll reset it, because the next thing you see, Riker's like pinning his arms to the ground, going like, call for security and back up and like whatever else, you know, and set phasers on kill or super stun or fucking toast. But like, I did think it was funny that Riker was like just kind of like leaning on the dog pile, because the dog pile was so high at that point. I was like, we don't need you at this point, man. You're a little late.
I didn't notice that, but I'll go rewatch it just to laugh at Riker.
It is worth a good laugh. So they end up subduing Danar and putting him in the brig. This is the first time we see the brig as we know it and love it in TNG, because in the Klingon episode, when they were like MacGyvering their uniforms together, they were just kind of like in a room. But this was like a good proper brig with like a comm station and like the force field and all that. So this is the first time we actually see it. Exactly.
Although I did feel like, because I feel like they said something about like maximum security or whatever. There was one guy outside that place. Yeah. And I was like, again, your security team, you guys are the flagship, and I'm just not impressed by your security at all.
Nope.
I would not want to be a very special delegate on the Enterprise. I would not. I don't know. Nyrock wants him to be sedated. And he makes a point of saying, make sure you sedate him at all times. And I was like, that's a little fishy. Like,
a little. So fishy.
Yeah, you've got him already arrested and we're going to return him. And we've learned that he's very clever and you're telling us he's ridiculously dangerous. But why does he need to be sedated? And every time I hear that in Trek where they're like, oh, are they unconscious? Bring them to me immediately. You're like, what are you trying to hide? Why are you being so sneaky?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, no, this was like drug him as much as possible to where he's hardly moving. And it's like, that doesn't sound right. That's
not our style. We're just going to hand him back to you.
Yes. I do want to go back real quick. Danar is tossing and turning and having a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And Troy is bouncing down the corridor and picks up on it.
As Troy ought to do.
As Troy is ought to do. Well, she was just coming from poking her head in. From poking her head into like 3-4 transporter rooms to see what was going on and a couple of holodecks. And then she was like, I'm just going to bounce and flounce up to the bridge or whatever. But she was actually really, really, really helpful in this episode. So
she is so critical in this episode. And this scene right here, where she picks up on his nightmares and is like, something's up and she goes over. You're like, oh, wow, that's something that only Troy could do. And this was my big complaint about Troy in season 1 is she was so superfluous, just such a useless character. She was a total sexy lamp. But in this episode and so many episodes in season 3, she's irreplaceable. No one else on the ship would have picked up on his nightmares at all.
Nope. I mean, Data is cool and all, and Geordi's cool and all, but they can't do that.
No,
they can't do that. So she goes over and she's basically saying like, I feel that I can feel your distress. And of course, the last thing Danar wants is somebody poking around in his emotions. So he's definitely a little off-putting with her. And he's like, a dark-haired woman once broke my heart, so that's why I'm a dick to you now. And she's like, yeah.
I actually did think that was funny. Because I thought that was, I did because I was like, wait, did that really happen? And then he was like, no. And I was like, hey, you totally got me.
That was a dick move right there.
I was like, he totally got me. Because I thought like that could be possible. But like, what's the odds of that? Oh, he's joking. Okay, that's not possible.
Yeah, never mind. That's not a thing. But here is something that I do want to talk about that happens. As they're talking, Danar is kind of feeling around this like dresser that's built into the brig, and he finds a button to push and a panel slides back to reveal a sink of water. And I was like, this has confounded me since I was a kid watching TNG. How did the set deck people build that, first of all? And then even if thinking about like inside the TNG world, where did that water come from? Is it always there? Wouldn't that drawer and those dressers be like musty and fucking moldy as hell?
It wouldn't always be there though. It wouldn't be a standing pool of water, because imagine how the Enterprise works. Like it's always recycling everything and like everything's always running and moving. So in my picture of how the Enterprise works, once you push the little button to open it, the sink fills with some water, but like when you close it, it like drains and gets used in other places of the ship or whatever. Like that's how I'm picturing it, just because everything that there was this episode of Voyager, I think it was Voyager. Yeah. Where they're describing to some alien about how the ship works. And they're like, everything gets recycled, everything. Like even like if you go to the bathroom, somehow your poop gets recycled and turned into boots. They're like, everything in this ship gets like used and reused and kind of like transformed. So yeah, I don't think it just would be like a standing pool of water, because it would get moldy and
and then your clothes are in the drawer right next to it, which is like those cashmere sweaters, you can kiss those goodbye, because you're going to get all kinds of problems. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But even from just the practical effect standpoint, that is such a ridiculously cool effect.
So cool.
I was like, oh my God, there's a sink.
So cool.
Yeah. And you can like rinse your face. And I always wonder if they're splashing water in their face or drinking some water, because they bring their hand up to their face and their mouth. And I'm like, are you drinking water and then splashing water?
Yeah.
Like I could never tell. Even like watching this for this episode review, I was like, is he drinking? I can't tell. And I just think it's like so universal. I just think it's super cool.
I think from the set deck perspective, that water is always sitting there in the scene, and they don't really interact with it that much. They just pretend, because they're not going to like refill it or whatever. Yeah. So that water probably is kind of gross, depending on how long it takes them to film the scenes. But man, so worth it.
So cool. So cool. Totally unnecessary effect and very appreciated. So Deanna and Danar have this connection. And she detects that despite his behavior, he is inherently against violence, which understandably Captain Picard is like, yeah, did you not see what just happened in the hallway? Like a couple of minutes ago.
Because she's going, he's not violent, Captain, but he's not. He very much is. He's very violent. But yeah, I mean, okay. Yes, he kills people from time to time, but in his heart, you're like, let me stop you right there, Troy. Like, I don't know why you're talking to us about this.
Well, I think that she had the right instinct, and it served her well, because she decides to poke a little bit further into like Roga Danar and his background, and she's trying to find like his military record. She's trying to find his police record, which he doesn't have one. And then come to find out that he was a soldier. And when she confronts him about his violence, Danar says, "You can learn to do it if you have to." And I was like, wow, that is so perfectly encapsulating of the way that the military works today, where I feel like a lot of soldiers are against violence. I know my husband, who's a combat veteran, he's always been against violence, but he's like, you can learn to do it if you have to, like that's your job, then you become good at it. And it's like, yikes, that is really scary to think about, like what conditioning like you can go through to like have to use the skill like in an emergency.
Well, I will also say a lot of like first responder jobs are like that, right? Like police officers, firefighters.
Yes.
You have to be trained to run towards the sound of gunfire, to run into a burning building. And as a soldier, you have to be trained to hurt other people, to even kill other people.
Yeah.
For some greater good. Like you have to justify it somehow in your mind so that unless you're just a total sociopath or a psychopath, then that's different because your mind is like okay with that. But for the average person, you have to train yourself to do these things that are completely against animal instinct as humans, because that is not how our species survives. So if you're running towards gunfire, you might get shot. If you run in a burning building, you might die of flames or smoke inhalation. And if you go around killing people, you're not going to have a very long life yourself. Yeah. And so you have to be trained constantly. And all those first responders are constantly trained. Like, even if they've been doing it for 20, 30 years, they're constantly in training to make their brains work differently from everyone else's brains. So that's that's a legitimate tactic. And I do want to point out, and this is like, we're having this really deep conversation right now, but just to make it a little bit more superficial, the costuming of Danar.
God, let's talk about his eye makeup. Oh my God.
The eye makeup was really cool. Like, I want one of those. But also his uniform. I don't know if you noticed, his prison uniform was burned. It was torn. It was dirty. Like, it looks like how it would look if he had been through all the stuff he had just been through, breaking out of prison and like climbing through who knows what. And I mean, I just thought that detail right there was just everything.
It was that costume and makeup and hair and everything, even just like the smudges on his face just looked so perfect. So much so that I did notice, of course, the eye makeup was really cool. And I did notice that his uniform was like burned and ripped, but not so much so that it like stood out in a weird way. It just fit seamlessly into the story. I thought it was amazing. And I'm glad we have that little bit of lightness because things are about to get dark, Shereese. Darker episode.
We're taking a turn.
Yeah, we really are. So as it turns out, Danar volunteered for the military, serving with distinction in several campaigns. He underwent extensive biochemical alteration as well as intense psychological manipulation to make him the super soldier. Some of the biochemical alteration was an electrical impulse like blocker. So that's why he doesn't appear to have like life signs, and why he was able to take a bunch of phasers and like it hardly phased him. No pun intended. He was programmed to be this perfect super soldier and then exiled when the war was over. And the veterans just didn't have enough time to adjust before being thrust into civilian life.
Well, and they got no help in readjusting whatsoever either. It was just like, war's over. Okay, guys, we don't need your help anymore.
Thanks so much.
And it was like, there was no transition. I mean, there had to be months, years of conditioning to turn them into super soldiers, but there wasn't even a day spent on helping them transition back to being civilians. Right. And it's like, if you took 4 years to create this super soldier and then they were in war for 10 years, you should at least use, 4 years to try to integrate them back into society and another 10 years of therapy, right? Like,
totally.
Yeah.
You need years and years and years. And Troy does bring this to the captain and the other senior staff's attention. And Picard says, essentially, we need to like maybe look a little deeper into what Lunar 5 is. And Picard says Lunar 5, an orbiting gulag. And I was like, what is a gulag? Because I've heard the term before, but I didn't know exactly. Like I had kind of a general idea. It was like a Eastern European prison camps or something. But I was like, let me do a deep dive on this. And oh my God, Shereese, what I found out, I was like totally gobsmacked. So the Gulag was a whole system of like thousands of forced labor camps in the Soviet Union that ran from 1930 to 1955. Those arrested and thrown into the Gulag system varied from resistant peasants, members purged from the Communist Party, dishonorably discharged military officers, German and other Axis power prisoners of war during World War II, members of ethnic groups that were suspected of disloyalty, whatever the fuck that means, suspected saboteurs and traitors, dissident intellectuals, ordinary criminals, and many completely innocent people who were just hapless victims of like Stalin's purges. At any given point, upwards of 10 million people were imprisoned in the Gulag, which is an insane number of people. Many of these camps were seen and like propagandized as corrective labor colonies, but these prisoners had to like fell timber, labored on general construction projects like building canals and railroads, worked in mines. Many prisoners labored under the threat of starvation or execution if they refused to work. And it's estimated that a combination of very long working hours, harsh climactic and other working conditions, inadequate food, and just a soupçon of executions for the funsies of it, killed tens of thousands of prisoners each year. And Western scholarly estimates that the total number of deaths in the Gulag from the period from 1918 to like 56 ranged upward of 2 million people died in the Gulag, which is so insane. And I thought that that was actually such a perfect encapsulation of what Lunar 5 was like to Picard. And I loved that the writers kind of dug that up because this episode came out in 1990 and the Gulag was ostensibly like kind of done by like mid 50s. So it was kind of an old reference, but I thought a really cool one that was so appropriate. And reading more about this only made me want to read even more about it because I was like, what the hell was going on here? So it was insane. So I would say no wonder Danar killed to get out of there. Wouldn't you?
Yeah, so I did not know all that about the Gulag. I knew it was a prison, but I did not know all that stuff. And that is, you know, very similar to what's going on Luna 5, except for the fact that the entire colony is just for soldiers.
Yeah.
That's the only type of person who gets to go there. It's like you guys were fighting to protect your people, protect your land, protect your planet, what have you. And now that the war is over, they just put you on a planet, they put you on a moon and put a bunch of security guards so you could never, ever leave.
Yes.
And it's just like really, really heartbreaking.
Yeah. And the minister is like, we give them comfortable home and food and like shelter and, you know, a few people.
So in that sense, it's not like the Gulag, right?
Yes.
But it's still very much a prison.
Yes.
It's not a vacation.
Golden cage. Yeah. Even a golden cage is still a cage, you know, and Picard kind of remarks that.
Yeah. They say even the most comfortable prison is still a prison. And then he said, well, you know what? This is a matter of security. So I'm not going to talk to you about this anymore. You know, Nyrock out. Or whatever. Yeah. And Picard's just like, matter of security. That is the age-old cry of the oppressor.
Yeah.
And I was just like, snaps.
Yes. Because the internal security call. It's like, we shouldn't really be talking about this with you. Also, thanks a lot, but out. It's like, oh, your application is getting put to the bottom of the pile, my friend. Like, this is not looking good for you.
Yeah, because now you find out the truth that like, well, you know, they couldn't readjust. We tried to give them comforts and so we really couldn't, but we don't really care about that because we don't need them right now. They're not useful. So just bring our guy back. We'll pop him back into that prison and we'll just keep on moving on in our lives. And Picard's just like, again, this is like a prime directive situation, except for the fact that they are applying to be a member of the Federation. So that means they like prime directive can be interpreted in such a way that you can't interfere in another culture's laws or the way that they run their society. But in this case, these people are applying to become a part of the Federation, and the Federation has rules and like regulations, and completely imprisoning a people just for the heck of it that didn't even do anything wrong. Yeah, it doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit with the culture, right? So they can kind of be like, well, we can step in. We can't tell you what to do or not do. But Picard's very uncomfortable with this situation. And he's now kind of on Team Troy of like, we should probably dig deeper. I don't like the idea of just handing him over and turning a blind eye.
Yes, I agree. And I think that this was a really good call on the captain's behalf. And he does come to meet Danar and he's like, I kind of want to tell you, I don't wish to send you back. This is out of my hands. We have to transport you back to this like prison collection vessel that's coming to like get you. But I really wish that it wasn't the case. And I wish we weren't in this situation. And Danar does tell him like, you'd be foolish to keep me. I am dangerous and I will kill again to survive. It's like, Danar has no misunderstanding about who he is. He is inherently against violence, but he has been trained to survive in violence and use violence to survive. So this man is like, I know who I am and I will kill again. And what's heartbreaking is, as Danar told us, he's killed 86 times and his enhanced memory allows him to remember every 86, like every one of those 86
every time.
faces.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, oh my God, that is really, really awful. But then we have what is sort of like the scene that sets the domino effect off, where they're going to transport the prisoner.
And they say, we need to drop force fields so we can transport him. And I say, what the F? No, you don't.
Why?
You don't need to drop the force fields to transport him.
Yeah. The shields are not up.
It's a force field. Right. Yeah. It's not a shield. It's a force field. It's not a shield. The force field is one face of the entire prison cell.
Yeah.
It's not a bubble
Beam
around
him through another wall. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
I was like, what? Seriously? No, you don't.
But then Worf comes in being all smarmy and he's like, we have it calculated that we're going to drop the force field 0.1 second before the transporter goes off. Even Danar's not that fast. To go where? It's a force field. Again, it's not shields. But here's my real question. He ends up breaking the transport beam by just wiggling around, question mark? I mean,
because he's biochemically enhanced and he's got like electricity and stuff in his actual body. Yeah. To me, it made me think of like the Borg. Because Borg can actually walk through force fields because of their like biochemical enhancements. Like they can just walk through them.
Yes, but I was talking about the transport beam. Like I understand you want to stay still through a transport beam because you don't know. No,
so I'm saying that's the only reason why he was able to like mess with it, because anybody else wouldn't have anything in their bloodstream or body that could interact with the transport beam.
Okay, but here's my question though. Here's my question. You're wiggling around and your pattern can get lost. And like, because of his body's adaptations, he can mess with like the whatever, but wiggling around causes an explosion. No,
he wasn't wiggling. He was breaking the beam. He was breaking the transport beam.
I was like, I felt like he was just fighting it and it fucking exploded. And I was like, this feels like The Simpsons where like a wheelchair falls over and it explodes and a leaf drops from a tree and it explodes. It's like, what is going on? Why would that happen? Also, it was a giant explosion and like Troy and Worf and these other ineffectual AF security guards get all knocked backwards. Yeah. And then all of a sudden a phaser's missing. Is he a sleight of hand artist? Like, when would that have happened? Would this have happened?
There's two things here. One is like he broke the beam using, body technology. Okay,
sheer
fine.
Will? Okay.
And then he ended up somewhere else on the ship because he still got transported somewhere. He just like messed with the beam. Okay. But he didn't break it completely. Sure. Okay, I buy that. But the phasers. Phasers, I was like, I can't deal with this. Somehow now a phaser's missing, which makes no effing sense. Yeah. Then later on, he puts the phaser into the turbo lift as like a decoy, and then it explodes. Okay, so he took a phaser somehow as a magician, and then he has used said phaser. But then we see him in the cargo bay with a phaser, and he's putting the phaser into the like control panel. And I was like, if you don't and then because he took a phaser from somebody.
Well, I'll tell you.
Then he knocked phaser.
He knocked out that. Yeah, there were two. We need to break this down because this is like
there were two. Yeah, there were two phasers that came from guards, but there were two phasers that came from nothing. Because he also put a phaser in the Jeffries tube. He put a phaser in the transporter. He put a phaser in the Jeffries tube. He put a phaser like the thing in the cargo bay. And
where did all the phasers come from? Yeah. You know what you do? Here's what you do, security, because you guys are fucking stupid. So let me tell you what you should do. When there is a super soldier on the loose, you lock down your motherfucking phasers. Close down the weapons room, post 45 guards in front of the weapons room, okay, and a force field around it, because clearly he couldn't get through the force field, because otherwise he would have walked right out of the brig. Like, we had some issues here. So there
were some issues. That was definitely, I don't understand that.
He broke the transport pattern and created a fucking explosion out of nothing.
Yeah.
So then he got a phaser in a split second. Okay, great. So now he's got a phaser, and now we've got the cat and mouse game again, which was fun to watch. So we see Dana in the turbo lift, and he sets the one phaser he took from Troy, I assume, and overloads it as a distraction. We're just getting really heated about this.
We're blaming Troy, which is so funny. Does she even ever have a phaser? No, I don't.
Not until season 6, she doesn't. No.
Yeah, no.
But we're just gonna say, okay, he got it off the desk. Okay.
Yeah.
But he sets that phaser to overload as a distraction, and I did think it was pretty heroic of Worf to jump on this phaser and like as it's like, like getting louder and louder, like it's about to explode. He jumps on it and like decommissions it immediately.
Yeah, which I was also kind of like when I saw it was about to explode, I was like, oh, run. Like all they had to do was like jump around the corner and it would kind of explode. It wasn't going to blow a hole in the ship. It's a phaser. Like it was going to scorch the doors of the turbo lift.
The janitors would have had to come and replace that carpet and put the old burnt carpet with the board carpet. And that would have been that. Yeah.
So with Worf jumping on it, I felt like that's a bit unnecessary. Like you could be damaged by that exploding on your chest, but the turbo lift is going to be fine. It's not even going to blow off a button. Like from the, not that they have buttons, but if they had buttons in their turbo lift, it'd be fine. So I was like, I don't really understand that. But then he, deactivates it before it explodes, which thankfully that happens. Yeah, but that was just clever though. That was a really clever, because I didn't see that coming either. I thought for sure he was going to be in that turbo lift.
Yes. Okay. So I thought so too. I thought he was going to be in the turbo lift. So we see that, Worf jumps on this overloaded thing phaser, and thank you, the phaser, and shuts it off. The next thing we see is Danar as he two-handed Klingon punches this poor security guard, takes his phaser and heads to engineering. And then the next thing we see, Geordi is out cold and his fucking visor is like blown off his face.
And not I'm just Geordi, but like they realize he's heading to engineering. So they're like, he's heading to engineering, like Captain to LaForge or whoever. I don't even remember who's calling who at this point. But they're like, he's heading to engineering. And then the split second later, you look and everyone in engineering is knocked out. Everyone. You're like, holy cow.
One of the engineers is like lying completely across the pool table in the middle of engineering. And I was like, dang, okay, that guy took a nap like hard.
Yeah, he just clotheslined him when he walked in. He just and guy just flew onto the pool table and just was out.
And that was it. Okay, here's something that I immediately went, no. He starts playing with the isolinear chips. And I was like, no. You do not play with the isolinear chips. It's the Naked Now all over again. Yep. Totally gave me a traumatic flashback. Mm-hmm. So Data is actually like working at data speed, thank God, to try to like reroute and ascertain what Danar is doing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Danar is rerouting power to Shuttle Bay 2. So then Data informs the captain and Riker like, hey, he's headed for Shuttle Bay 2. And here's something that I thought was interesting. We next see Danar walking through a Jeffries tube, and it's the only time ever in TNG that you see a Jeffries tube that's tall enough for a man to walk through. And I did look that up and find that in my book. And I was like, look at that. Yeah. And I was like, it's just kind of like a small hallway. How would that be between decks? That's kind of crazy. But anyway, it's the only time we see it. So they never use that set again, which seems like kind of a waste, but I thought it was sort of neat. But now he's got these like random phasers he couldn't have taken from the engineers because they don't wear phasers on the job. So suddenly he's got extra phasers just to be sprinkling around the Jeffries tube.
So he's got some other phaser. Okay. That was the only thing where I was just like, another phaser? Like, we've already established we don't have pockets in TNG.
Yeah.
So, and he also doesn't have a holster, a clip. Where are these phasers coming from?
But a fanny pack, nothing.
Yes, not even a fanny pack. So he puts the phaser in the Jeffries tube and whatever. And Data's kind of like, you know what? He's messing with stuff and he's leaving a trail. Mm-hmm. But I think this is for misdirection because he knows that we know that he has no life signs that we can pick up. So he could literally be anywhere doing anything and we would have no idea. So he's purposefully going around pushing buttons and blowing stuff up. So that way we have a trail of where he is and what he's doing. So what is that about?
Exactly. So why is he leaving panels open? Why is he, like there's just a lot of misdirection because that is really his MO. And so Data's like, he might be actually headed for the cargo bays because there's transport, there's a little transport pad for cargo there. So Data floods the cargo bay with anastasine gas, which is not a real gas as far as I know, and like puts him to sleep, or it's enough to put him to sleep. And Worf and his team go in and they find that a pressure suit is missing from one of the cargo boxes. And so they're like, oh my God, he's going to try to go into the shuttle bay from the outside of the ship. And I was so bummed out that didn't happen because I really wanted to see that.
So cool. Me too. So cool. I was like, oh my gosh. And then I was like, because they have sensors, but for our benefit, a lot of times they have an external camera as well. So like when there's a ship that comes to meet them, they're always like on the screen so that way we can see it as viewers. So I was like, do they have like cameras on the outside? Are we going to see someone like moonwalking on the outside of the Enterprise? Like, are we going to get to see like the curves of the ship and like the little things hanging off of it? But we didn't do that. But that would have been
also cool. That totally makes me ask the question: if the ship jumps to warp while he's out there, it wouldn't do anything to him because there's a vacuum in space, so there's no like wind to knock you off. Wouldn't there be? I don't know.
Well, but there's
like inertial dampeners, though. Yeah,
there's the equal and opposite force. So if the ship pushed off and it like he was touching it, he could be pushed in the opposite direction in theory. But like it could also just like snap and disappear. I don't really know how fast warp goes. If it really went warp, like what would it look like for some stationary object? I don't know.
Yeah. See, these are physics questions we have to have answered.
We need more physicists on our show, like clearly.
We really do.
So then we're like, okay, he's got to be knocked out. He's going to be on the outside of the ship. So everybody's like, oh no, let's get out there. I don't know what they were planning to do, but they all ran out. I don't know.
Jordy's like, I've got a hell of a migraine, but I could probably get in a shuttle and like bop around a little bit and see if he's like, he would whoop Jordy's ass even from the outside of the shuttle. Like,
yes, he would. So, and poor Jordy, he always gets beat up. Poor guy.
He sure does.
Then next thing you know, we see Danar like still in the cargo bay, hiding under some boxes or something with the pressure suit. So all that anastasine gas that was pumped in didn't do a darn thing. He didn't even put on like the little gas mask that's why I thought he was just going to put on the gas mask.
Me too.
Just to like breathe and like, not get knocked out. He didn't even need that. So his body is so augmented that gas was like a nice little spray of water. And he just waited for
it was like the misters in line at Disneyland.
Yes, exactly. So he waited for the security to come in and leave out. And then he got up and was like, well, back to what I was doing. Doop, 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 doop. It's like, oh my gosh.
Well, here's a thought that I have, and I wonder what your thoughts are. Worf hides, and he does a little misdirection. And he's like, all right, we'll cut him off at this and this pass. Let's go. So you hear the doors open to cargo bay. Love that cargo bay door and holodeck door.
Yeah.
Yes. And then it sounds like the team is left. So Danar comes back out, and Worf ends up that he was hiding. Turns out he was hiding like behind one of the
some
canisters.
Cargo. Sure.
Yeah. And at this point, he's like, you are cunning. You must be part Klingon. Da, 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 da. Now, here's something that happens. The phaser that he put in the Jeffries tube explodes, cutting power to the cargo bay. Was he expecting that Worf was going to do some misdirection and surprise him? Like, were you expecting somebody to surprise you? I do not understand that.
Well, like, he was planning a bunch of misdirections, like all along the way. So this could have just been one of his multiple plan B, plan C, whatever. I'm sure he wasn't expecting Worf, but he did need a distraction so that he could beam himself from the cargo bay to the prison ship.
Okay.
So I think that explosion was supposed to be so people could be like, oh, something's going on in the Jeffries tube. And in that second, he would beam out.
Yeah.
Which is what he ended up doing anyways. He just had to beat the crap out of Worf first. And then he still went with his plan. Poor Worf. So just so you guys know who are listening, we actually had a chance to interview Michael Dorn, the actor who plays Worf, a little while ago on Clubhouse. And we got to ask him lots of questions about acting and the craft. And of course, his time on TNG and Deep Space Nine. And afterwards, I told my mom like about how exciting this was that we got to talk to him. And the day before, we got to talk to Garrett Wang, who plays Harry Kim on Voyager. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, Mom,
so rad!
it was so great." So I was telling my mom, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I had this conversation." Da, 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 da. And my mom's reaction was exactly this: "That's cool." She would have been more excited if I told her there was a sale on toilet paper at Walmart. But what did happen was the next day she realized like, oh, this is important to my daughter. I should probably pretend like I care. So the next day she texted me and was like, you know what? Did anybody ask Michael Dorn why he always gets his butt beat every single episode? And I was like, Mom, that question did not come up. No one asked it. She was like, that's the only question I have. Why didn't anybody ask that?
I wanted to ask that question and I was like, I'd really better not, because poor Michael Dorn probably gets that question all the time. Like, you're supposed to be this big bad warrior, or Worf is, and yet he's getting his ass kicked left, right, and center. So really, it's kind of like in that stratagema, the Zach Dorn that has like the reputation for being a strategist, but no one ever tests it. Yes, thank you. Where it's like, but nobody tests it. Here, it's like even a step below that. Everybody tests it and they just walk right over him. So you suck at like your job and like you suck at being a hard ass. But I guess it's a plot device, so whatever. Yes, I wanted to ask him that. But Michael Dorn, to his credit, I think, was there to talk about like acting, directing, whatever people wanted to talk about. So he didn't really want to talk about like Worf all day long. So I didn't want to ask, but I was wondering, I was like, didn't you just sometimes be like, damn, can Worf like win a fight sometime?
For real. And honestly, that's really a question for the writers, not the actor, right? Because the writers are the ones who wrote him getting beat up all the time.
Yes.
He just acted it out. So it would have been a question for the wrong person.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that happens here. Worf gets beat up again. And then Danar transports himself over to the transport ship, the little shuttle that was supposed to take him back to Lunar 5.
Yep.
And then you're just like, oh, snap. And I was like, wait, what? Because I thought he was trying to escape and didn't want to be with them. And obviously he got the upper hand and he was not their prisoner, but I was so confused. I was like, why did he transport to that ship? What's his plan? I didn't know what he was planning.
You know what he could have done is he could have just gotten the phaser with the sleight of hand bullshit that he did in the first place and just beamed over with the phaser and been like, hey boys, have a seat, or whatever it was he said after all this cat and mouse.
He doesn't need a phaser.
Need all that. No,
he doesn't even need a phaser though. So like,
well, I guess, here's the thought though. I've had many, I realized today. They could have transported him from one brig cell to another. And what he ended up doing was transporting right onto the bridge of that little transport vessel.
Right.
So now he was able to like get his way. And
yeah, that's exactly what he did. He didn't transport to the brig to be in another prison. He transported right to like their cockpit and was just like, I own you. And those guys were like, I surrender, because they know how dangerous he is. But I still, as a viewer, I was like, but what's he going to do with the ship? What's the plan? Because doesn't he want to escape? And what's he going to do with these guys? I was just like, where is this going to go? It was a big question mark. And then the show goes on commercial break, Yeah.
And it was like, no. So we come back and Prime Minister is hailing the Enterprise. Danar has attacked the penal colony on Lunar 5 and they're on their way to the capital city. And so Picard is like, we're sending an away team. And Picard, Troy, Data, and Worf beam down. And this was actually a very interesting scene for me, because now the Enterprise is in possession of the facts. And they know that Nyrock, or whatever his name is like not, he has greatly done a great disservice to his citizens that are veterans. And that one smarmy little shit, like assistant prime minister was like, just, we didn't want them around and we might need to use them again. It's like, do you hear yourself? Do you hear yourself? Like, we've done this horrible psychological conditioning that we did not disclose the volunteers. That could not be undone, or like it might be, but you wouldn't have good quality of life. Like, we're going to do
it might be, but we have zero research into making it undone, because we want you to stay that way in case we want to use you again.
Yes. He said, we studied it thoroughly. And as a scientist, I'm like, I'm going to need to see the facts on that. Because that doesn't mean anything. False. Yes. And I think that this is this like perfect dressing down about the way you treat your veterans. Like, Picard accuses them of making them into monsters and then condemning them for being monsters. And I think that's absolutely right. Where it's like, you did not even tell them this was going to happen to them. And then you condemn them for something that you made them
did to them.
Yeah. is disgusting. And right when this happens, Dana and the other veterans storm the capital city, and we've got guys like zip lining down and stuff. And I was like, dang, okay.
And you only need one of those guys to take out all those like bureaucrats.
And by the way, all those bureaucrats, there was the shitty assistant prime minister who was like 40, and then everybody else was like 80. So it's like, you basically just need Counselor Troy.
Troy and Danar, and we're good. Like, we can round you all up and then have a therapy session about why you guys are all dicks.
Yes, so 100%.
So they surround everybody and you're like, ruh-roh, what's going to happen now? And basically they want things to be different. They don't want to be imprisoned anymore. They want their lives back. They want equality and citizenship and acceptance and very reasonable things that they want. And they don't want to be tools, and they don't want to be in this prison until they need to be quote unquote used again. Yeah. And everything that they're saying, they have every right to have it.
Absolutely. And the prime minister is like, we can't have this. Call your ship. And I love that Picard goes, quite right. And he goes, 4 to beam up. And they're like you said, this is a matter of internal security. You wanted us to stay out. You've got your prisoner back. And we cannot interfere with the development of your civilization, which I suspect is going to develop quite a lot in the next number of minutes, or whatever he says. That's like to that just, it was like, oh, dang, that was such a mic drop and a beam out. And I was like, yes, that was the best beam out I have seen yet.
Yes. So and then he goes, and if your government survives the night, we'd be happy to revisit this idea of membership into the Federation. Bye, guys. Yeah. Just like, oh, so good. Yeah. It was so good.
It was so good. It was so good. So that's where the episode wraps. And I like that Picard does kind of mention once he's back on the bridge that like, it's a matter of survival. And I have a feeling that the Angosians are going to choose to survive. So there's going to be some shakeups, but I think they're going to be fine. And I was like, cool. It wasn't just so callous as to be like, you guys are on the point of nearly getting murdered. Bye. It was very much like, you know what you have to do. So do that. And that was really interesting. And I like that. And
plus he knows that Nyrok and the others are, because they said multiple times in those opening 2 minutes that they're intellectuals, they're academics, they're not into violence, they're not into, brute force and blah, blah, blah. So when confronted with Jason Bourne and his whole army of super soldiers, they're not going to fight. They're not going to fight them. They're going to sit and talk to them, which is all they ever wanted to do anyways. So it's like, we're not leaving them to die. The Jason Bourne army are not going to slaughter the whole government. That's not what they want. They want to be heard, and the other people don't want to get shot. So they're going to talk. They're going to figure it out.
Yes. Yeah, they will, and they're going to be fine. So that's where the episode wraps. Do you have any final thoughts before we jump into next week?
Man, it was just so good. This was just such a good episode. I am just like over the moon with these writers and the makeup artists and the costume and the set deck, and like everything has just come together for season 3. This is why this is one of the greatest shows of all time. Like this is it right here, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree with you. And this is one of my most memorable episodes for me. When I saw the little thumbnail and I saw it was Roga Danar, I was like, oh, this one. Hell yeah. Like I was so psyched about it. I was like, this is going to be an easy as hell watch. It is not going to be painful or tough to get through or like, what? I don't remember this at all. Like too short a season, which I only remember because it was bad, not the other way around. But yeah, when I see that thumbnail, I become irrationally angry. But this one, I was like, yeah, like I was psyched about it. So next week, we're breaking down season 3, episode 12, The High Ground. Thanks so much for nerding out with us. We love it. We love you. And we'll see you next week.
Bye. Thanks for geeking out with us. Be sure to join the crew at thetngpodcast.com to be the first to know when we do our live shows or host events exclusively for our members. We'll see you next time.